I've got some breaking news for you tonight. I've been speaking with sources and can now report a key attorney has left Donald Trump's legal team. That lawyer happens to be a major witness in the classified documents case against him. Tonight, I have learned that Evan Corcoran has quietly departed Trump's legal team. This matters because Corcoran is potentially going to be a critical witness against Trump if that case ever goes to trial. He was the one who went through the storage room at Mar-a-Lago about 2 summers ago looking for classified documents after they received a subpoena from the Justice Department. Trump allegedly misled him about the whereabouts of those documents and also encouraged his attorney, to lie to the Justice Department. Remember, Corcoran actually had to go and testify before a grand jury investigating the case after a judge ruled that he couldn't use attorney-client privilege to shield from investigators the meticulous notes that he had taken about his interactions with Donald Trump. As we later saw, those notes helped lay the groundwork for prosecutors to indict Trump, referring to Corcoran as Trump attorney number 1 20 times in that indictment. If the documents case ever goes to trial, and that's a major question tonight, Corcoran would likely be a key witness for the prosecution. Even though he ultimately recused himself from representing Trump in that case, he had stayed on for a bit in the other federal case against Trump, the one for election interference. If you'll remember, he was there alongside Trump when he was arraigned in Washington last fall. That is no longer the case, though, I have heard, and here's why this matters tonight. It's Corcoran's role as a witness in the documents probe that could pose the biggest problem for Donald Trump. Corcoran recorded voice memos that turned into detailed notes about his conversations with the former president, including instances where Trump suggested that he should mislead the Justice Department. There was that unforgettable moment that was detailed in the indictment from the special counsel Jack Smith after Evan Corcoran had found some classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, about 38 of them. They were discussing what to do with them, Evan Corcoran and Donald Trump, when the former president asked him, quote, "Did you find anything? Is it bad? Good?" According to Corcoran's notes, Trump made a plucking motion during the conversation, which Evan Corcoran took to mean, okay, why don't you take them with you to your hotel room? And if there's anything really bad in there, like, pluck it out. Of course, as we all know now, and from that indictment, a few months later, the FBI showed back up at Mar-a-Lago with a search warrant. I have an all-star team here with us to discuss this breaking news. CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Elie Honig, and also CNN political commentator and senior political correspondent for the New York Times and Trump biographer Maggie Haberman. And Maggie, just to hear this, quiet, but a big departure from the Trump legal team.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, as you say, Corcoran is a key witness if this case ever goes to trial. He provided prosecutors, and it was under subpoena. This was, as you noted, prosecutors went and pierced the attorney-client privilege under the crime fraud exception. The Trump team had fought this. There was nothing Corcoran could do, but Corcoran, kept notes. He had recorded notes of his conversations with Trump, and those were extremely helpful to prosecutors as they were trying to figure out certain things that had taken place in the aftermath of their repeated efforts to try to get these documents back and their trip to Mar-a-Lago to try to get documents back. Now, one of the things that we have seen with Trump repeatedly is lawyers leaving him and what that ends up looking like, or other witnesses and allies leaving him and what that ends up looking like. He's about to go on trial in Manhattan, and the key witness, the central witness, is his former personal lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen. So the notion of lawyers departing Trump's world looms very, very large. Now, I don't know when this case will go to trial. It's, at the moment, it certainly doesn't seem like it's on track anytime before the election. What it would look like if Trump loses the election and then what happens with the case, we have no idea. But this is significant in Trump's world.
Elie, what do you, just to hear something like this, what stands out to you?
The last thing that any criminal defense lawyer wants is to turn into a witness against his own client or former client. They try everything to avoid that scenario. And for that reason, he's going to be an especially effective witness for the prosecution, because it's going to be clear to all involved that the last place he wants to be, Evan Corcoran, is in that witness stand. but sometimes that's the job. Now, if people
He's
are
not
wondering,
like a willing witness who's
Right,
dying to get up there and tell all, and he just is going to be potentially forced.
he has to do his job. Now, if people are wondering, how could an attorney testify against a client? Isn't there this thing we hear about called the attorney-client privilege? The answer is that has been pierced, broken in this case, because you'll remember a federal judge ruled last year that the conversations that Donald Trump was having with Evan Corcoran were in furtherance of a crime. That does, to be clear, does not mean Evan Corcoran was complicit in that crime, but means what Trump was trying to do through Evan Corcoran was commit the crime of obstruction. So he's going to be a really important witness.
And that was so rare. I mean, that was a huge fight with the district judge in Washington over compelling him to have to go and testify that they fought. But in the end, I mean, they lost, and he had to go, and he couldn't say, oh, I'm not answering that question because it's attorney-client privilege. Yeah. He had to answer the question.
It's a big deal to break through that privilege. I mean, that privilege is sacrosanct, and judges do not do that lightly. So this judge held a whole hearing and ruled, yeah, what Donald Trump was doing was trying to break the law through Evan Corcoran. And Evan Corcoran's role here is he was sort of the unwitting vehicle through which Donald Trump misled the FBI.
It's very specific to the obstruction piece of this investigation. And the obstruction piece of the investigation, the documents investigation, tends to get sort of overlooked, right? The part that gets focused on is the national security secrets that Trump had at Mar-a-Lago. But there is also this second aspect of allegedly misleading investigators, and that is where Evan Corcoran is a big piece.
And I should note, and this is important, the Trump legal team, or the Trump team is denying this. They're denying our reporting. We reached out to them before we came on air. They said that Evan Corcoran is still on the legal team. Sure. They're arguing.
Can I respond to their denial?
Sure.
He can't possibly stay on the legal team. I mean, it's almost a mathematical impossibility. Once you are a witness against the person, which he now is, you can't stay on the legal team.
It's kind of surprising it took this long.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Trump team also said that the New York Times was wrong in saying that Trump had been privately saying he liked a federal abortion ban, and we were not wrong. So do with that what you will.
Yeah, you are quite familiar with the history of denials.
Right.
But Maggie, you were one of the first people and your colleagues to report on the notes that Evan Corcoran took. And I think when people are looking back at this and they're trying to remember which attorney is this in which case, the notes were kind of like the ball game that kind of shocked Trump and others that he had such detailed notes of conversations that he had with Donald Trump.
Yeah, we were also the first people actually to report on the efforts by prosecutors to pierce attorney-client privilege to the crime fraud exception. And what we learned about why they wanted to do that was detailed in these notes. And one of the things that's so striking about it, and you know this very well, Donald Trump doesn't like when his lawyers take notes. He doesn't like when anyone around him takes notes. He has been like this for decades. There was a meeting that he had at Trump Tower many, many years ago where he swooped in behind a junior lawyer at his conference table and crumpled up the notes the guy was taking. This was his approach in the White House. This is his approach always. So the notion that there was such a detailed roadmap by one of Trump's lawyers is disquieting to Trump.
If I can add that, the fact, on the contrary, that Evan Corcoran was taking such detailed notes, and he was doing voice memos, right?
It was while he was driving.
Right, while he was, so he's taking extraordinarily detailed notes. That tells me he had to have some inkling, like, I'm going to need to memorialize this at some point.
Well, and we've seen the history of Trump attorneys who have gotten in trouble before. And, I was thinking about this moment when we interviewed Trump employee 5, Brian Butler, the former Mar-a-Lago employee, in the classified documents investigation. He brought up this attorney for people who maybe are wondering who he is. I just want to play the moment of what Brian Butler told us about this.
It's funny because I remember seeing this taller guy, I think slick back, silver hair. I think it was Evan, who I now know to be Evan Corcoran. And I saw a bunch of other people in the living room. I had no clue. I'm just seeing all these people. I have no clue what they're there for. I was on the cloister outside over by the bar. The former president was walking towards the living room, like he was going to enter the living room. He was with Secret Service. I remember he said hi to me. Hi, Brian. Hi, Mr. Trump, or President Trump. And then he went in and talked to them, but I had no clue who those people were.
Well, and now he knows, but that moment matters because that was when Corcoran was searching to find the documents that matched the subpoena, thinking he had gone through all the boxes. But what we know from what's alleged in the indictment is Trump was telling these other guys to move them the day before Corcoran went through that Mar-a-Lago storage room.
Yes, and one thing that I was just thinking about what Ellie said a second ago about how Evan Corcoran may have felt the need to memorialize what was happening. In a normal world, taking notes about what's happening, especially in this kind of a scenario where you are dealing with the FBI, is not abnormal. This is actually what lawyers do. You take notes, you make sure that you have a detailed record of everything that you have done. So yes, Evan Corcoran was doing what he thought that he was supposed to be doing, as we understand it, which is look through a set of boxes. It turned out that there was what prosecutors have described as a shell game, and investigators have described as a shell game with these boxes. That was a significant moment. It just looked different than what people realized from what they were seeing in that moment.
Yeah, I guess it does speak to the level of what it's like to be an attorney working for Donald Trump.
It's a tough gig. I mean, let's look through the history. You mentioned Michael Cohen, right? We've seen John Eastman now. He's indicted. He lost his license. Jeffrey Clark, he's indicted. He lost his license. Sidney Powell, she's indicted. Jenna Ellis, she's indicted. They both pled guilty. Rudy Giuliani. I mean, it's really hard to think of an example of someone who's represented Trump and come out of it with their financial situation intact, their professional reputation intact, their exposure to crimes intact. It's a grueling job. It's a tough gig. And here we're going to end up with a situation where this guy's going to take the stand against his former client.
Depending on what happens with the case. But yes.
And also, it's, the original attorneys who were working on these two cases when they were still investigations and not actual cases, they're all gone from the legal team. John Rowley, Jim Trusty, now Evan Corcoran. All of those names are not going to be the ones taking these to trial.
No, I mean, Trump cycles through lawyers. We have seen this over and over and over again. This goes back, frankly, many, many years, but certainly at least from when from the time when he was president on, he cycled through lawyers during the Mueller investigation. He cycled through lawyers around his efforts to stay in power. He has cycled through lawyers since leaving the White House. He's about to go on trial. We'll see what this looks like.
And to that end, let me just flag, watch the dynamic between his legal team and Donald Trump, and you both will be reporting on this, because there's always a little bit of tension at trial. Yeah. Sometimes the defense lawyer wants to go one way, the client wants him to be more aggressive here or less aggressive there, and that can bubble over, and sometimes that gets reflected in the courtroom itself.
We've seen it already, at least in the civil cases. There was a lot of Donald Trump literally poking at his lawyer, Alina Habba, to get up.
You just reported on his latest attorney, Todd Blanche, and how he is now at the forefront of all of this.
And how he has changed his life around Donald Trump, which is what a lot of lawyers do.
Maggie Haberman, Ellie Honig, always great to have you both on set, but great to have you tonight.